Hi everybody, my name is James Fry and I work for Newton-Conover City Schools at Newton-Conover High School. And I'm facilitating the module for Newton-Conover City Schools with embracing blended learning as the focus. So before I start, a couple of things that I really want you to make sure you're thinking about to get out of this session is, well, first of all, figuring out kind of the implications for implementation in your classroom. So really, what effects is this going to have on your student performance? How is it going to redefine your assessment in your classroom? And how will it redefine lesson delivery, last of all? And then secondly, I'd really like you to think about how you're going to use this model to work toward a limitation of direct instructional time. And I'll get into that later on in the module. So to start with, I've gotten some great information that I am using in a combination with my own regarding blended learning from iNACOL, which is the International Association for K-12 Online Learning. So to start off with, we really need to ask the question, how well is our current K-12 system functioning? And that really depends on who you ask. If you were to ask legislators, especially in North Carolina, you might get a different definition than if you ask someone who's out in the trenches. Legislators may say, you know, it's functioning well, but we need to move toward more of an adoption of technology use, whereas teachers who are in the trenches may be saying, well, just using the technology isn't working. I really need to figure out how that, you know, is changed by the curriculum that I have and how it's redefined. So really the question is whether or not we're actually preparing our students for the knowledge workforce, which would be just using technology for the sake of technology and figuring out, you know, how to deliver more information, or just, you know, turn handouts that we may have into digital handouts, if you will, or the globally competitive workforce, which is developing that sense of creativity and innovation in our students, using technology as a tool to do that. So not delivering a handout in a digitized format per se, but redefining how we deliver our curriculum as teachers. So to start off, thinking about blending learning. Blended learning looks like organized chaos, essentially, in the classroom. So as you can see from the pictures below, you see students everywhere who are independently working on computers, devices, and things like that. For that really scares a lot of people because they're concerned about, you know, oh, I need to make sure that I can monitor what each student is doing on their device. If you are truly implementing blended learning, student browsing shouldn't be an issue because they shouldn't have time to go off task. So, does this look like blended learning? It's probably not blended learning because this is an instance where a teacher is delivering direct instruction by itself, and you don't see any students actually doing anything but receiving, okay, consuming. That goes against the ideologies of blended instruction if that's all he's doing. This, again, not blended learning. Students are being receptive, of course, maybe even compliant, but that does not mean that they're actually innovating or creating or engaging. So one thing we really need to understand blended learning is that it doesn't require a tech-rich atmosphere by any means. A lot of us are stumped on the issue of not having enough devices to facilitate blended learning environments. That's not necessary. If you can get access to devices at certain points throughout a unit, students can collaborate in class and, you know, develop project plans and work on projects that they have, and then spend even just a part of their time during that unit in the computer lab conducting research, answering critical questions, and figuring out, you know, how to share that with people who it could seriously have an impact on. As far as teaching and learning goes, the implications for that, you need to know what the student is doing and where the student is, what the teacher is doing and where the teacher is, and what and where the content is. Those are really the three variables of blended learning. So that brings us to our definition from Horn and Staker. In 2013, they defined blended learning as a formal education program in which a student learns, at least in part, through online delivery of instruction and content with some element of student control over time, place, path, or pace, and, at least in part, in a supervised brick and mortar location away from home, and the modalities along each student's learning path within a course or subject are connected to provide an integrated learning experience. So again, that reiterates what I was saying earlier about, not having to have a tech-rich school or campus to be able to focus on blended learning. It's really about giving students independence at the heart of it, and giving them choice on how they pace themselves through the curriculum and how they choose to create products of learning. So what makes something blended learning, online learning, competency-based learning, or personalized learning, and how do these work together? There are blended learning models. Now in this module I've provided you with several blended learning models, including one that I created myself with some colleagues at Michigan State University in the Master of Arts in Educational Technology program, called the Fuse Learning Model. There are several other models that serve different purposes. So for instance, you will hear the flex model throughout this module. You'll hear of the rotation model and the flipped model. All of these are different brands of blended learning. Emerging blended learning models, including the rotation and the flex model, also include the self-blend model and the enriched virtual model. So as you can see in this diagram here, really you have to have a combination of brick and mortar and online learning to have blended learning, and that's really that's the blended part. So you have a combination of traditional instruction and technology-rich instruction. So that again reiterates it's okay for students to alternate back and forth and for you to have some time to deliver information. The difference between blended learning and flipped learning as a model is that with blended learning you still have the teacher delivering the information part of the time. With flipped learning, teachers do screencasts or videos of themselves to deliver information, much as I'm doing right now with you. And that's what makes this brick and mortar component different. With the online one, informal and full-time online learning are both options under the online learning. It doesn't have to be exclusively online, as in you tell students to come in, log into whatever learning management system you use and tell them to get started. That is blended learning, but that's not quite what we're talking about. So with the rotation model, you've got 4 other ones here. As you can see, the flipped classroom model is an element of that. So with rotation, students engage in station rotation, lab rotation, and that also includes the flipped classroom. So that really just puts students in different groups. So you can have students who are in groups working to synthesize critical questions for a project. What do we even need to research? What do we need to think about to come to our conclusion, and how are we going to present that? You don't need a computer to do that. You just need to get conversations happening between students and encourage that creativity, innovation, and collaboration. The flex model kind of takes part of that and adds on to it, talking about an online platform with face-to-face support. So that is where students can not only engage in those groups, but also engage on computers to actually conduct that research. Self-blending is where students actually attend school, but they take the classes completely online. So they have attendance per se, but that's about it. The teacher really doesn't do a whole lot more than just facilitate student use of the computer. And then enriched virtual is where students sometimes learn in a physical school, and other times they do it remotely. So that's kind of like a hybrid course in college, where students are only required to come maybe 1 day a week. So these models are good, but as the person who wrote the definition says, if you can't identify the front of the room, you are probably in a disruptive or blended classroom, okay? So you really need to figure out a way to grasp that chaos, as I mentioned earlier, embrace it, and allow your students to engage in collaboration in all these groups throughout your classroom, while using technology as a facilitating tool to guide their learning. So from a research perspective, with blended learning, in 1994 we really started to see online learning coming to fruition. So in 1994 we see the first K-12 online schools that students could attend. They were open to the public. In 2001 we get the first report on the results of that learning, and they're positive. They're extremely positive. And then in 2004, we see the first report about what's called blended learning. And then if you look down here at the bottom of the slide, you can see K-12 online learning then is about 20 years old here in 2014, and blended learning is about 15 years old, though it has evolved exponentially since its inception. So the research actually right now says very little about blended learning because people are still slow to adopt. Teachers are scared of what they don't understand. Um, I can attest to that as much as anybody else. And it takes time to implement. So one thing that I would really recommend for implementation is to take time, go slowly. Don't do the entire class at one time. Maybe just take elements, teach one unit in a blended learning style to start with as a trial by fire basis, and then maybe the next semester try to take that from one unit to all units, or one unit to three, or whatever the case may be for you. Everett Rogers said in his 1963 publication, The Diffusion of Innovations, that one can't seek knowledge about an innovation until he or she knows it exists. So a lot of this, really, the point here is that a lot of this stigma surrounding blended learning and this excitement now is that people really just didn't understand the capabilities. Technology hadn't fully evolved yet, and we didn't really understand its impact on student learning. We still don't quite understand what a wide-scale impact is, but there are studies being conducted as we speak to figure out what that is and hone in on those advantages. In every single study that has been conducted, teachers are taking on the role of change agent or champion. There are common adoption characteristics from an innovator to a laggard. Common way innovation reaches critical mass or a tipping point. And then common communication methods come that influence earlier adoption. So you can see right here on this graph. So the differences between face-to-face teaching and online teaching, as blended learning is a combination of the two, is that in face-to-face teaching we've got our students in the classroom. With online, they're online, of course. Face-to-face, you have a teacher in the classroom. In online teaching, a lot of times the teacher is actually online with them, and there's minimal face-to-face interaction. It's very asynchronous, at least to this point. The interaction in face-to-face teaching is mostly verbal, some visual, but online you can use video conferencing. Now we're using tools, we're seeing tools used quite frequently such as Google Hangouts, Skype, and tools like that to facilitate that conversation between students or between teacher and student. There's a flexible schedule online for work completion, so students can really complete it as they accomplish it, but in semester classes that are brick and mortar based, students don't really have the option of doing that, and teachers don't really either under our current existing educational model. So it really begs the question, how do we redefine our direct instruction practices and synthesize that into something that can be self-paced? And the answer is the flipped classroom model, but that's in another module for you. And then finally, in a face-to-face class, a lot of the prescribed curriculum is based on standards, and there's a lot of use of hardback textbooks. And in an online class, there is a prescribed curriculum based on standards, but there's usually just online resources that are pulled, online text, digital things, digital resources, videos, things like that that can be used to accomplish those same learning goals. So this is just a little info graphic where you can basically see that the transition to blended teaching from textbook to online teaching consists of technology, a learning management system. In this case, you're using Moodle, but there are several other learning management systems such as Canvas, which is one I'm a very big fan of, Edmodo, which is extremely popular, and other things such as that. Google Classroom is one that is opening in August of 2014. Ultimately, blended teaching is a pedagogical shift. Okay, so it's really not about using technology in the classroom recording yourself on a video, what have you, or digitizing a handout and saying, that's it, I'm done, this is blended learning. It's not about that. Um, it is about change in teaching, figuring out how your role is redefined, how to redefine the ratio of instruction that you provide from maybe 50% direct instruction, 50% student work to 80% student-led work and 20% direct instruction. It's really about that transition. Changing learning styles, so giving students the agency to have that voice and choice to choose how they accomplish the same learning goals that you would in a brick and mortar classroom, and giving them different opportunities to produce products of learning. Changing pedagogy. Obviously, you wouldn't walk into a classroom and begin by saying, okay, today students, we are going to blah, blah, blah. We're going to discuss the Industrial Revolution and then spend the entire class period delivering lecture. Blended learning doesn't work that way. The students would be in a facilitated environment where they could seek out that information themselves and then think about it, digest it, and then turn their understanding into something tangible, some kind of product that's shareable, like a wall wisher or a blend space or something like that. All these tools that I will share with you in this module. A change in class organization. Again, as that tweet said, you shouldn't be able to see where the front of the classroom is. It needs to look like chaos, and you need to embrace that chaos to have productivity. And then finally, things should really look different in a blended learning environment. It needs to be more student-centric, as I've said, and it needs to be more personalized. So above all, blended learning is really about rethinking how class is structured, rethinking how time is used in the classroom, how resources are allocated, and personalizing learning for all students. Engagement should not be an issue because there should not be time in the class period for students not to be engaged. They should always have something to do that will keep them busy. And that really helps with classroom management and other issues that we face. And then obviously the student-centric learning. And finally, using data as teachers daily to customize learning opportunities for students. Another hallmark of blended learning is immediate feedback. So that immediate feedback, providing that for students, is really crucial, because if you have a learning management system where you can offer students feedback based upon certain performance on standards like mastery learning objectives, if you can provide that to them right then, they immediately know what they're proficient in, what they aren't proficient in, and what they need to do, and what you need to do as a facilitator and as a teacher to give them the ability to succeed in the class. And that's really what it's all about. So I hope that you've enjoyed this introduction to blended learning, and for the rest of the module, I wish you luck, and thank you so much for listening.